Hi there, welcome back to Reel Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
This is episode 7, and today we're going to be talking about Mortal Kombat 2021 edition.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
We'll get started by giving the overview, and this is pulled right from Letterboxd, which I think gets its information from the movie database. These are always interesting to read because they are accurate, but not accurate. Let's get into it. The overview for Mortal Kombat. Washed-up MMA fighter Cole Young, unaware of his heritage and haunted by Emperor Shang Tsung's best warrior Sub-Zero, seeks out and trains with Earth's greatest champions as he prepares to stand against the enemies of Outworld in a high-stakes battle for the universe. Is that tantalizing, Nathan, or what?
Absolutely, there's some high stakes there for sure.
Yeah. So Mortal Kombat, this is a recent movie, 2021. When did it come out? Just a few weeks ago at the time of recording. So this is directed by Simon McQuoid, starring Louis Tan, Jessica McNamee, and Josh Lawson, to name just a few. I mean, this is a pretty big ensemble cast. I don't really recognize any of the actors' names here. That's not to say I haven't seen them in other films, but there we are. And this is effectively a reboot of the Mortal Kombat franchise, which ended in a whimper, I think, back in 1997, in terms of live-action films at least, because we had Mortal Kombat come out in 1995, and then very shortly afterwards, in 1997, was the second film, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. From what I understand, there was a third live-action film that was had sets built and was ready to go, but Hurricane Katrina came in, destroyed all the sets. They basically gave up the production, and I think a lot of the actors from the first film were going to come back for that. But afterwards, Warner Brothers basically got hold of the rights, and here we are now and looking at a reboot of Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, okay, so there was a third film originally?
Granted that this is IMDb trivia I'm looking at here, but I do feel like I've seen some articles in the past few years about that, especially leading up into the release of this particular film.
Right, okay. Yeah, because in preparation for watching Mortal Kombat 2021, not the official title, the year of the release.
This is not like Wonder Woman 1984.
The 2021 release of Mortal Kombat. I watched the 1995 original, and then I watched Annihilation as well to compare it. And then I was looking online, and I kept seeing, I didn't do a whole lot of research, obviously, but I kept seeing snippets of Mortal Kombat 3, but it wasn't really easy to find, and that's because it doesn't actually exist. So
yeah,
I'm not going crazy, or I'm not going crazier than I thought I was.
I think you might already be crazy, but you're not gaining more craziness. Yeah. I do believe there was a very short-lived, one season of a live-action TV series at some point. And of course, we're going way back in time here. This is, if the last live-action movie was 1997, we got just over 20 years of extra material here. And you know what? There's probably a few animated movies in there as well as cartoon series. So
I believe so, yes.
What is your relationship with the Mortal Kombat franchise? Have you ever played any of the video games?
Right, so I have not played a whole lot of Mortal Kombat, honestly. I don't even know how many games there are now. There's got to be there must be dozens, literally, of Mortal Kombat games at this point.
I would think they must be up to at least 10 in the main series, and I'm sure if it's anything like any other fighting game, there's tons of little variations of it, right?
I remember mostly growing up, I remember the kind of moral panic that came with Mortal Kombat. It was a target of a lot of parent groups and a lot of other kind of community groups, specifically targeted because of its violence in that ongoing debate about media's effect on people's behavior, specifically violent video games, and linking that to violent behavior, which is to say there is no real link, but certain groups use it as fear mongering. But I remember that was kind of the big thing. We as kids, when it came out, we weren't allowed to get games like Mortal Kombat, or like I think Doom was on that list.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't end up playing them until years later, when maybe I was at an age where the novelty of extreme violence really wasn't that big a draw anymore. But Mortal Kombat it's been like a staple in the gaming world. Like everybody, it's a brand that literally everybody knows, even if you don't play the game. Everybody who games knows Mortal Kombat, who's played it at least a couple times, right? I played one or two games, in the old kind of, what would that be, like 16-bit era, obviously, and I played played one or two different Mortal Kombat games on the maybe Xbox One era.
Yeah.
But really, I'm not also very good at these fighting games, maybe because I didn't have them growing up, so I didn't have that same kind of practice where, like, with Super Mario Brothers or Super Mario World, I can blow through those games pretty easily because I spent hours and hours playing them. But with fighting games now, it's no fun getting beaten by a 12-year-old kid. So
yeah, that's right. Everything is basically gone online now, right? There's not a lot of couch co-op or couch tournament fighting of these games going on anymore.
Well, that's what I really miss, and this is me, I guess, showing my age a bit, but that really in the room split screen or shared screen for fighting games where you're in the same room with the person fighting them. And I guess now it's more of an online thing, but it was part of the fun was always like teasing the guy or making fun of the guy or girl that you were fighting next to you in the room, and like when you pulled off an awesome combo and just like turning to them and saying and giving them some kind of comment or rubbing it in. It's not the same when you're not there in person, right?
Yeah. So I think you sort of nailed it there. Everyone in the video game world is aware of Mortal Kombat, and to a larger extent, a lot of people remember in the early 90s when Mortal Kombat came out and all the controversies that it brought forward in media and mainly politics. I think the first game came out in arcades probably 1992 or 93, and I do remember it very well. I remember the home releases of Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, and at that point, Nintendo had taken a stance of no blood on their systems. So infamously, all the blood in the Super Nintendo version was replaced with sort of a yellowish sweat that would be pouring off people.
Oh, really?
And the Genesis was fully intact with all blood. Mortal Kombat 2 was in my memory, it came out pretty quickly afterwards. And on the Super Nintendo, by that time, we had a rating system, like a self-imposed rating system in the video game industry, where they could rate that game M for mature because it had a bunch of red pixels exploding out of these characters' bodies. So Mortal Kombat 2, 1 and 2, I remember these games pretty well. I never really got into them. I was probably more of a Street Fighter fan. Mortal Kombat, it always felt like the controls were a bit clunky and whatnot. But all that being, the quality of the games aside, they were a lot more well-known at the time for their controversy, right?
Well, since that time, too, they've kind of become iconic. I mean, even people who don't know the games, like you say Scorpion or Sub-Zero, or like Johnny Cage to a lesser extent, but like people know these characters. They have their own kind of mythologies now, right? Thanks in large part to the movies as well, right?
And I just want to say before we get into the movies here, one of the big reasons these games were controversial and what brought them into the limelight of video gamers were the finishing moves that would be executed. So like any fighting game, they followed the same formula where you had 2 rounds of fighting between 2 characters. And at the end of the second round, you had the ability to perform a fatality on the other character. And each character had their own unique fatalities. With the right button combinations, you would do something grotesque like ripping their spine out, setting them on fire. I think Liu Kang ate them, like he turned into a dragon and ate their upper bodies. There's a lot of grotesque things happening. I think it's mostly those aspects that got all the media and political attention here.
So it sounds like you have more of a relationship with these games than I did, right? It sounds like you played them a lot more.
I definitely played them a lot more in the 90s. I remember renting them with friends. And specifically Mortal Kombat 3 came out. I recall buying this on PC. And I could never get the disc to work. We would install it. We would reformat the computer. No matter what I did, I could not get Mortal Kombat 3 to work. And I just never played another Mortal Kombat game since.
Yeah, like I was never big into the fighting game genre to begin with, so it never really felt like I was missing out on anything. I think the only fighting game I really remember enjoying is a little, maybe lesser known title called Brutal Paws of Fury, which is all these kind of anthropomorphic animals fighting each other, and they have various kind of finishing moves, not gory at all, but I still have a copy of that game for the SNES. So after watching the 2021 Mortal Kombat, I did a little bit of reading, but apparently these games, there's a lot more lore and backstory to these characters that have been added over the years by these video games that I guess hardcore fans of the series are going to recognize these lore elements in the movie itself, right? It went that deep in the games. I thought it was really just still a bunch of cool looking characters fighting each other, but apparently they all have like intricate backstories where they're all interconnected and everything.
And the overall story in Mortal Kombat, like from probably both of our perspectives, is just the basic setup. Mortal Kombat is a tournament where Earth's greatest champions are fighting for Earth's survival, the survival of our planet, because every generation there's a Mortal Kombat, and if the Outworld wins 10 times in a row, they get control of our realm, I guess. And that's basically the extent of the background. I know some of the basic characters, but like you said, the games have given us a lot more lore surrounding these characters that would probably pay off more so when you're playing the games. I think in the original 1995 Mortal Kombat, there wasn't a lot of that lore set up, or I probably just wasn't aware of it, but it seemed a little more straightforward now. Potentially this reboot of Mortal Kombat in this year would give a little more tidbits or a little more Easter eggs for the expanded lore that's gone on in the video game world.
Well, it really feels... So I watched the new Mortal Kombat, and then I watched the 1995 Mortal Kombat right afterwards, and then, much to my detriment, 1997 Mortal Kombat Annihilation right after that, just to get a feel for the movies. And it really feels like the new movie, I don't want to say has a lot more depth, because there's not a whole lot of depth to these movies in any real kind of substantial way. But it really felt like it was drawing on a lot more story elements and maybe mythology elements and lore elements than maybe that 1995 version had to work with. Because the 1995 version of the movie really just a bunch of people come together and they randomly fight each other. It's supposed to be structured as a tournament, but it's not really. It's just people. It seems like a bunch of random fight scenes edited together, whereas the new movie, it seems like there's more of a semblance at a plot and kind of more traditional narrative elements in terms of character arcs, such as they are, and just like and world building. It feels like there's a lot more world building elements and a lot of setups to potential sequels.
Being a film in this modern era of cinema, franchise cinema, there's going to be tons of hooks to an expanded universe here.
Well, it makes sense in the context of the modern movie landscape. Obviously, it felt almost like a team-up movie like Avengers without the individual superhero movies to set up the characters. But also in terms of like, this is a long-running video game franchise, and I think they're coming into this with the expectation that they're going to have a series of, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 films, or however many they can milk out of this, coming from both like the cinematic landscape, but also the video game model as well, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious now, since you sort of alluded to that Avengers formula, how well the Mortal Kombat series would have lent itself to having a few individual movies, because the introductory scene in this film is top-notch. It's beautiful action, it's really well shot, it looks gorgeous. Everything about it felt fantastic. And the opening scene is basically Sub-Zero coming in to fight essentially Scorpion before he turns into Scorpion, right? And you'll have to forgive me because I don't remember the characters' names here at all, but it's about 10-15 minutes of action between these two characters and giving them some motivation, where Sub-Zero kills this character. He ends up going to some kind of afterlife where he becomes Scorpion. but it gives him some motivation. And as Sub-Zero kills his family, he kills his wife and his daughter, and I think leaves leaves a baby alive, but is unaware of this. So Raiden at that point comes in, picks up the baby to carry on that lineage. And then we fast forward to modern times where Cole Young is in that bloodline of Scorpion, and I keep using these names like I should know their actual name, their family names, right? But for me, I would say that whole scene with Sub-Zero and Scorpion doing their history felt like it could have been an entire movie. Just like Cole Young, who we're introduced to afterwards as Scorpion's heritage, it could have been an entire movie by itself right there, where it's not entering the Mortal Kombat tournament, but it's in that Mortal Kombat world, and he slowly gets introduced to his destiny as a champion of our Earth.
Absolutely. That whole opening was pretty awesome. Apparently in the video game lore, there's a long history of rivalry between Scorpion and Sub-Zero. Also, just to go back to a point you made about maybe not recognizing some of the actors in this, you probably recognize the actor who plays Scorpion, Hiroyuki Sanada. He's been in a lot of stuff, including The Wolverine and a favorite of mine called Sunshine. But he shows up quite a lot in a lot of movies. I just want to give him a shout out because he is so awesome. But you're right. That whole opening scene, I think it was it in ancient Japan, I think? Because I think it was...
That's right.
No, there's an actual historical conflict, or whether it was like a part of the lore of the games, like false, like made up kind of alternate history kind of thing. But it seemed like Chinese versus Japanese ancient clans, and there was family feuds going on. And yeah, like that felt like that would have been the perfect setup for an introductory movie for these characters. And it would have been cool to have, like, you have obviously Jax and Sonya Blade. That would have made for a movie in itself, because those two characters are connected.
They're trying to hunt down Kano, right?
Yeah, and then so that introduces those three characters, and you would have had Cole Young, who I believe is an entirely brand new character that was made up specifically for the movie, and it doesn't appear in the actual games themselves, which is also, we'll get into that later, kind of an odd choice for why he would kind of lead these, specifically when in the original movies, in the games themselves, I think, Liu Kang, I think, is generally kind of the quote-unquote main protagonist of the storylines generally, from what I understand. So it feels like an odd choice that they created a whole new character from none of the games to lead this movie. I don't know.
And maybe we want to get into this later, but honestly, Cole Young, not the actor himself, but the character, is perhaps the weakest part of this film. If he was pulled in as a random new character for the film, it's a testament to ignoring the lore of the game and like not trusting into the lore of the game to provide you with interesting characters.
Yeah, so I don't know how deep the actual lore in the games goes. I'm going to have to claim some ignorance here. I don't know if they would have had enough content on their own to develop maybe 3 or 4 movies before you had that kind of Avengers-style team-up, but it feels almost like a missed opportunity in an age where people are trying to replicate that success of the MCU, and all of a sudden here's this property where you have all these established characters with their established backstories, with an established fan base. It seems like a prime opportunity to start building that up, right? Especially if you start off the first movie with 2 of the most popular characters, Scorpion and Sub-Zero. I think you could have pulled in enough people, enough fandom to get worked up about the next movie with maybe some lesser known characters. I don't know how, like, I think Sonya Blade and Jax are still pretty well known, but you build up with like the most popular characters to get that energy going, to get that excitement. But I think, I don't know, would there be enough character depth to build 4 or 5 movies around before you got to a team up movie?
Yeah, and that's where I think like my own ignorance to the Mortal Kombat series and the world that they built, like I can't say for sure. But imagine a scenario where you have a Sub-Zero and Scorpion like ancient rivalry movie, and we know it's about Mortal Kombat and it focuses on that. Fantastic. A couple of years later, this other movie comes out, and seems to have all the same directors and some of the same production going on, but it's about Cole Young. And at the very, very end of this, we're treated to a story about this guy fighting for his family in different fighting tournaments. It's a good, martial arts film, good action film. And at the very end, they drop that teaser about him joining the Mortal Kombat tournament. And it's going to be similar to that scene in Split, where at the very, very end, it's like, oh my goodness, this is all tied into the unbreakable superhero world, right?
You just have, out of nowhere, apropos of nothing, Samuel L. Jackson, and he just comes in, I've come to talk to you about the Mortal Kombat initiative.
You sold me on the whole thing right there. That's fantastic.
But that's the thing. I don't know if there's enough backstory or enough depth of story to build that kind of structure around. But it feels like, it felt like there was enough there. It felt like enough of a hook there, enough of a base, or enough of a foundation that they could have, if you hired, I don't want to say that the screenwriters for this weren't talented, but a talented enough screenwriter could take that foundation and build something on top of it. It feels kind of like a missed opportunity, just because getting into the structure of the movie itself, the first half of the movie, or the first maybe third of the movie, where it's really introducing all of these different characters together, it feels a little bit rushed.
Yeah, honestly, I would want to go out on a limb and say that the original Mortal Kombat 1995 movie did a more effective or efficient job of introducing these characters and their little backstories than this movie did. This movie seemed to spend a little more time with it. It just felt like it was retreading familiar territory, and I'm not sure how fair it is to say it's retreading familiar territory when, yeah, I remember seeing that Mortal Kombat in 1995 in theaters. I'm well familiar with this, but we have a whole new generation who's seeing a Mortal Kombat movie potentially for the first time in live action, right?
Right. So I think for me, rewatching that 1995 Mortal Kombat, it felt almost like a video game put up on screen, right? They didn't waste a whole lot of time with backstory. They just like, here's the character, and here's one thing you need to know about them. And it's like, okay, this guy's the fighter who trained with the monks. This guy's the big Hollywood guy who's trying to prove his worth as a martial artist. This girl is trying to track down a known terrorist. This guy is a known terrorist. And it was just like, no, we're just going to essentially cut out all the backstory stuff and get straight to the fighting. And it was just like, it felt a lot more like a video game kind of translated more directly to the screen. Whereas the 2021 Mortal Kombat felt like they were teetering on, making it just, let's just have it pure fights, and then the other half of it is like, oh well, let's give these characters backstory and motivation, and it feels like making a quote unquote serious movie, making a quote unquote kind of fun movie, and it feels like they were kind of torn between those two modes of storytelling, and it felt like if they had gone in one direction over the other and really committed, this movie could have been great. I hesitate to say great when it comes to video game movies, because of the history all the way from Super Mario Brothers through to the Hitman series. I mean, I don't think any movie adaptation of a video game has nailed it yet. But there was a lot of potential in this movie for greatness.
Yeah. So before we get into any spoiler talk with this movie, the setup of the film is basically the same, right? Where we have these fighters coming together after we're introduced to their stories, and they are supposed to be Earth's champions, and now they are responsible for fighting in the Mortal Kombat tournament to basically save our realm. They're going to save the planet, right? That's the general gist of the story. Before we get into more spoiler talk, what would be your general walk-away feelings on this movie?
I'm really, really torn, actually, because it fell down so many times in terms of storytelling, where it got so close to doing things so well, and then it just kind of faltered. But on the other hand, I found myself laughing within delight at so many scenes in this movie, partially due to there were a couple actors, specifically Josh Lawson, who played Kano, who I think stole every scene he was in. And then just some of the brutality of some of the violence and the kills in this movie, it was just like so over the top that they really embraced that over the top video game style that I was just like, I was laughing. I was in it 100%. I was thoroughly entertained by a lot of it. And that's why I'm just like, I'm so down the middle on this movie.
I think it's pretty fair to say as well that the original Mortal Kombat film was PG-13. And this is definitely, I think, what they like to call the hard R. There is a lot of violence. There's a lot of gore. They really do not hold back. They obviously went in knowing they're going to be making a pretty brutal, gross film.
Oh, yeah. There's some bodies being sawed in half, organs getting ripped out, people being eviscerated, heads being crushed gruesomely. I mean, they went all in. They knew exactly, I think, the audience for this, and they played. In a lot of ways, they played to the series' strengths, but in a lot of ways, when they tried to get into the more nuanced aspects of storytelling, it didn't quite mesh well with the violent action set pieces. It felt like, here's the set pieces we want to get to, but the connective tissue in order to get to them wasn't necessarily in place properly.
It sounds like for you, and also for me, the movie was really down the middle in terms of quality, because I'm not getting a lot of that context, but at the same time, I'm being really entertained with what I'm seeing. The action is good in this movie.
Oh yeah, like the fighting scenes were, I mean, compared to the 1995 version, I mean, all due respect to the 1995 version, there's some really kick butt scenes in there, but the fighting was just a lot better in this one. In terms of the martial arts.
I think they definitely benefit from a more modern world of film creation, and they also benefit from like 3 times the budget that the original movie had.
Oh, absolutely. Those effects, especially with like Sub-Zero, when he's using his ice powers, especially that it was in the trailer, which kind of sucked that it gave it away, but when I think he cut Scorpion and the blood came out and he froze the blood and he turned around and used that as a weapon. It's like, that's just like really cool, innovative thinking. Like, here's like, how would these powers be used in the real world? Like how, like if you were thinking and these powers actually existed, how could they be used innovatively in this world? And there's some really neat touches like that I wish they'd put into the rest of the story. Like you said, like that opening scene between Scorpion and Sub-Zero and building up that backstory, that was a really smart way to start the movie. But it was like, for me, that was one of my favorite parts of the movie, because there was that characterization and there was that interaction. There was stakes there being built up, right? Another part of it is there's this relationship hinted at between Kano and Cabal. So Cabal was another character who kind of stole the scenes he was in. But I guess they were part of like the Black Dragon organization, which is part of the Mortal Kombat lore. And Cabal made some kind of comment that is like, "Oh, Kano's the reason why I have to live inside this iron lung," referring to this mechanical suit that he was in. So I was like, "Oh, so there's backstory and history between these characters." Like, well, how is Kano connected to Cabal? Cabal is in Outworld, which is this other realm, this other kind of dimension or plane of existence with the bad guys. I was like, well, how did they first interact? Because Kano has no idea that Outworld even exists. And then how did Cabal get from Earthrealm out to Outworld? It's like there's a whole like little hints like that. That really drew me in. That was really neat. I wish it had more of that in there.
And it's kind of unfortunate. I don't recall all the characters who died, and we will now, I think it's pretty safe to say, get into some spoiler territory. But with these characters actually dying in this movie, does that just ruin, like, does that just get rid of the chance of us being able to revisit some of that world building and lore?
Wait, before we go any further, I've always wanted to do this. Fatality! No, I think that there was a scene at the end, and you're probably going to remember it as soon as I say it, but at the end when there's a bunch of people dead, mostly the bad guys, and Shang Tsung, the bad guy, the main villain, who's played by Chin Han, and he says, "Death is just another portal."
Oh, yes.
And then that gray fog comes in and takes all the corpses disappear and everything. So I'm thinking that I think I was reading up a little bit about the in-game lore as well, and that a lot of times these characters will get resurrected through either magical means or through cybernetic means. So I think that
makes sense.
In the Mortal Kombat universe, that death is not as permanent as it is in our universe.
That's pretty fair.
Yeah, because it would be a shame, I think, to wait, especially seeing the reaction to some of these characters who died. I don't think you can kill off Sub-Zero like that, although I think in the games, the moniker and powers of Sub-Zero were used by many different characters. I think in the games, like the original Sub-Zero, his brother takes up his mantle and his power somehow. So I think there's other ways to resurrect them as well, where it's not literal resurrection, but somebody takes on their mantle.
Kind of inherits their powers.
Yeah, almost like comic book style, right? Where you have different people, like think Batman Beyond, where you have Terry McGinnis taking up the mantle of Batman, and so Batman is quote unquote kind of resurrected that way, right?
You know a lot more about this lore than I do. I'm watching this movie on quite a surface level with my 1993 knowledge of Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, and I have to confess, I looked a lot of this stuff up after the fact. I am not by any means a Mortal Kombat expert. I know that there was a lot of different Easter eggs to the game, like when I think Kung Lao kills Nitara, he utters that phrase "flawless victory."
Yeah,
which is of course in the game. In the games, if you're able to defeat your opponent without taking a single hit, the announcer comes on and announces flawless victory.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of those gruesome kills where he had he had special hat powers where he had his hat spinning on the ground and then it literally like a saw blade and cut this other person in half. And I haven't looked that up, but I have to assume that that's in reference to a specific fatality move in the games.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of fan service in this game, and I could appreciate what they were doing, especially with the spinning hat that just saw somebody in half. Was pretty, I mean, from my perspective, fun to watch.
Yeah, another direct reference to the games, which is pretty neat, was when Kano finally kills Reptile and he pulls his heart out. I think that's specifically a reference to one of his finishing moves, but also afterwards he looks at the other people in the room, I think, and then he holds up the heart and he says, "Kano wins."
Yes, that's right.
Because I think in the video games, the announcer would announce who won like that.
Yeah.
But he announces himself, which is in line with the character.
Yeah. Really, I think you were right before. The movie was fairly engaging. It was fun to watch, right? There's a lot of good moments like that. I had an issue with the fact that the tournament never seems to actually happen. Because I'm familiar with the first Mortal Kombat, where Shang Tsung basically kind of tricks some of Earth's heroes into coming to the island and fight in this tournament, and they're all in it, but there's a lot of rules on the tournament has to be won fairly in order for him to take over the Earth realm. So Shang Tsung and his goons are trying to raid Raiden's temple to get an upper hand in the tournament to basically, I guess, kill these guys off before, which is not really fair. Like the Shang Tsung in 1995 Mortal Kombat wouldn't necessarily stoop to that level. He wants to beat them in fair combat to show how good that they all are. So we never actually get to an actual tournament structure in this movie.
Yeah, which I think in reading up about the background of the movie, I think they already have, 2 or 3 sequels already planned, if not already kind of in pre-production, if that makes sense, like where they're writing scripts and getting story ideas. So to the film's detriment, I think one of the failings of the film was specifically that there were so many setups to future installments that may or may not happen. There were all these references and callouts. I think specifically one of them was, I think they saw Katana's fan blade weapons as one of the items in Raiden's temple there. And there was a poster at the end and a super obvious setup for a sequel with like a poster that's with Johnny Cage.
Yeah.
I think the movie's name was like Citizen Cage. Didn't actually show the character's face, I guess, leaving it open for casting in the future. But it was so focused on future installments, and it was Mortal Kombat tournament without an actual Mortal Kombat tournament, because it was all
just conflict.
The whole story was about how he was trying to cheat and kill all of these heroes, because I guess in this mythology in the movie, there's a bunch of people born with these tattoos that look strangely similar to the Mortal Kombat icon. Who would have thought? But they are essentially kind of, I don't know how they're chosen, but they're chosen ones who were chosen to defend our planet, and they potentially, with training, can unlock their arcana, which grants them specific kind of magical abilities or supernatural abilities that they can use to fight back these forces of darkness.
Yes.
Right? And so that, I thought, was a really neat, I don't know if that's an addition to the Mortal Kombat lore, but I think that was a smart way to kind of, just really explain away like why these people have their powers. Because I think in the video games, Kano has his laser beam eye because of cybernetic implants. In this movie, he has it because he unlocks his arcana abilities. But it also opens up the possibility in the future. It's like, oh, well, why does he have cybernetic implants with that laser eyes? Because he lost that eye in the fighting, right?
It makes more sense why Shang Tsung would want to kill these guys before they get their arcana abilities, because they're going to become that much more potent when they actually have to go fight in the tournament all fully powered up.
Yeah, to be fair, the rules of the tournament are not really spelled out well. In any movie, it's these ancient archaic rules set forth by the elder gods, but the elder gods seem kind of fickle, and they don't sometimes seem to care when people are breaking the rules. So I'm not sure why they set those rules in the first place. It's all kind of vaguely defined in this movie, which is kind of frustrating. But I think maybe the assumption is that the actual Mortal Kombat tournament is going to happen in movie 2 or movie 3. I don't know.
So one of the most iconic characters out of the Mortal Kombat series is arguably Goro, the 4-armed behemoth monster. And he makes his appearance in this movie. But I couldn't help but be let a little down by how he was treated.
First of all, how do you think he looked in terms of special effects?
Here's the issue. I just watched the Mortal Kombat 1995 movie in preparation for this a few hours ago as well, and that I cannot get the image of Puppet Goro out of my head. I think he looked fantastic in 1995, and in my mind, this 2021 CGI Goro just blends into every other CGI monster I've seen.
I think the issue specifically in this case was because the character design, he was very kind of dark overall, and he only appears in the film at night, right? So you don't really get to see those, like, his character design pop that much. Where if you look at the 1995 version, which is amazing use of practical effects and puppetry, but he was like shown in like broad daylight, so you really got to see the character design pop. So I think if they would have set that fight scene between Cole Young and Goro in the daytime, it would have been a lot better in terms of just showing off the character design. Because I thought, like, the CGI is come to a point now where, like, these characters are practically photorealistic now, right? You did not like the portrayal of Goro.
No, basically, at one point in his introduction, like, we see him rip somebody in half, right? Which was a visual treat. And then he fights Cole Young, and like you said, it's all dark or whatever. And it was a battle. It was a battle, but it was also a chance for Cole to really come into his own powers and overtake this really powerful monster, this powerful fighter. Sorry, how does Goro die? Does Goro die in that battle?
He does, yeah. So Goro is just laying into Cole Young, right? And Cole's trying to fight back, and then all of a sudden, he sees his family under attack, and that's giving him the motivation that Raiden was talking about to finally unlock his Arcana powers. And all of a sudden he gets this kind of yellow metallic kind of armor appearing on him, and then he gets these two blades in his hand, like almost like reverse blades. Almost looks like the police batons, but with blades on them. And then every time he gets hit, it almost feels like he's like storing up that kinetic energy, almost like Black Panther in the MCU. And which is kind of a neat callback to earlier in the film where I think somebody teases him for like his special ability is getting his butt kicked.
Yes.
And it turns out that it actually is, where he can like almost build up that power, where like his suit starts glowing red as if he's building up that power, and then he finally gives the uppercut that his daughter keeps telling him to give people.
Yes. Which is also another signature of the Mortal Kombat series, and pretty much the only thing I did in that game was a sweep kick and an uppercut.
Well, it's funny too because like I think when they're training, they pay homage to the sweep kick, the cheapness of that sweep kick move.
They make a comment about it being so cheap.
Yeah, where I think Kung Lao is just constantly sweep kicks Kano over and over again, and he just like he gets the same look on his face that I'm sure all of us did when we got when we got our butts handed to us, but that cheap move.
Yeah. So Cole Young dispatches of Goro with his new powers, and then later on, Cole Young is fighting, and forgive me, I don't remember the name, but it's this woman with the crazy sharp teeth, and he's really struggling to fight this woman until Sonya comes in and develops her Arcana powers, I think, and dispatches of this teeth lady. And I'm just thinking, well, Goro must not have been that powerful because he was like a mid-level boss now, where, from my understanding, he was like number 2 right before Shang Tsung, the final fight. You were going to have to go through Goro, and he was a tough guy.
Yeah, so the character you're talking about, where he's fighting Melina later on, and Melina apparently is a modified clone of Katana in the lore. Although she's obviously with her mouth and her teeth, I think that's the signature look for her. But yeah, you're right. I think in the games, like Goro was like one of the big bad guys, the toughest bad guys in the game you had to defeat. And here he was just like a mid-level thug almost.
And to be fair, like in the original Mortal Kombat movie, Goro is really amped up as this villain, and there's a nice montage of him just taking out fighters. And keep in mind, this is in a tournament, so Goro, these fighters probably would have fought others. They reach Goro and they just all get killed. Like, it's just death after death after death. And then Johnny Cage finally achieves that level of the tournament where he has to fight Goro, and that's where he does his famous ball punch and then kicks Goro off of a cliff. I mean, he's dispatched in a fairly cheap manner, but there's at least some menacing aspect to Goro here, where he's gone halfway through the film.
Yeah, there's no real build up to Goro in this film. He's just another thug. I think like Reiko and Cabal, who are I guess I don't know if they would be considered maybe second tier characters in this universe, but it feels like there's some fan favorites in there that kind of got the short end of the stick. And like Goro, like giant, like 8 foot tall dude with 4 arms, and like it feels like he should have had some kind of build up, right? I mean, I like how they played that scene almost had like a kind of a horror vibe, where there was this like there's this giant monster attacking this dude, but also some of the physics also didn't quite add up. Just look at the mass of Goro versus Cole Young, and I'm pretty sure one punch from Goro would have like collapsed his ribcage. Until he got his Arcana powers there with his vaguely defined Arcana powers, because that charging of his suit never comes up again in the rest of the movie.
No,
it was just in that one fight where to be fair though, Goro does get a pretty awesome death in terms of Mortal Kombat, where he's getting completely eviscerated. It's pretty gory, where you see like his like actually entrails falling to the ground and everything. It's pretty nuts. But yeah, you're right. Like it feels like they were just like jamming so many characters into the film. It suffered a little bit from that maybe Infinity War / Endgame syndrome, where you just can't give every character they're doing. There's literally not enough time,
Yeah.
especially in, what was the runtime on this? Maybe like an hour and a half, hour, 40 minutes?
I believe the movie was an hour and 50 minutes, so it clocks in at 110 minutes exactly.
And without the benefit of other movies giving background on these characters, right?
What did you think of the essentially the climax of the film where Cole and the newly reborn Scorpion battle Sub-Zero?
Again, I thought that was one of the best fights in the movie. That was real. Listen, I'm with most people on this. I think Scorpion and Sub-Zero, just with their costume designs and their character names and their powers, they're just inherently kind of cool characters. And just,
they look so good.
They looked awesome. And now, like, the special effects have really caught up to what their powers are. And so just watching Scorpion shoot out his, traditional, his blade on the end of the chain.
Yeah.
And that kind of weapon, which is set up perfectly. It's one of the few examples in the movie where they do that setup and payoff storytelling technique perfectly. Where earlier in the movie, in the earlier fights, it's his wife's gardening tool that he ties to a rope, and he's twirling it around and using it. A great setup for why he comes back from, I think, the afterlife he comes back from, and he basically adopts that as his main weapon, but like upgrades it to like a chain and a proper blade.
Yeah, it looked pretty cool.
Yeah, and then that with like Sub-Zero's powers, and he was using them like intelligently in the movie, like he was creating these frost blades and throwing them at people, or he was like, like I said before, like, using people's blood and freezing it, creating ice walls, shards of ice flying through the air at people. Like, it's just really, really well done. And all the actors in that too. I think the actor who played Sub-Zero did a great job too. Because when they take their masks off and they have to act, because now they always have to act, and that is Joe Taslim played Sub-Zero. And I think, I want to see more of this guy because he played a great villain.
No, it was really, I mean, those fights were pretty engaging. It did feel like it was a lot of fun to do that stuff. I don't like the Cole Young character, and he was in that final fight, but I got enough pleasure from the others in their combat.
Well, I really thought that with that opening scene, that the conflict between Scorpion and Sub-Zero was going to be at the core of the movie.
Yeah.
And then they just...
It really wasn't, yeah. They just
went
a whole other
forget
direction.
about it for the bulk of the film. I mean, this is why I talk about being so frustrating. It's like there's these flashes of greatness, of what this movie could have been if you'd given it to, Christopher Nolan, if he'd given it like the Batman Dark Knight treatment. Like, there's enough character beats in there, enough of a foundation where they could have, if somebody taken the time to really flesh this out and maybe cut out a couple characters and save them for the sequel.
Yeah.
I think it could have been really something special.
So with all that, like, where does this version of Mortal Kombat stand to the original Mortal Kombat for you?
So the bottom of the heap is obviously Annihilation.
Easily.
Yeah, which I would give maybe 1 star out of 5 if I were being generous. It's so bizarre because it picks up exactly where the first movie leaves off, but like half of the actors are different. Half of the characters are played by different actors. It feels really, the special effects, even for 1997, really like it must have had no budget. I have to assume.
I did not look up the budget of Annihilation. I did look up the budgets for the other two. The original Mortal Kombat ran in at $18 million.
Okay.
And I believe, as I saw some stuff before where they might have had a smaller budget. They did their movie. The initial tests were really positive, and they needed to fit a few more fights in. So they were given a few more $1 million to
nice.
like extend the Scorpion Johnny Cage fight. I believe the Sonya Kano fight was added in afterwards, and in rewatching it, it's literally like a half hour of just, all right, these two are fighting, then these two fight, then these two fight. It's a whole bunch of fights in that tournament format. This movie, Mortal Kombat 2021, budget of about $55 million.
Okay.
Which seems reasonable, and especially after you look at the special effects and the feeling of the film, it feels like they got their money's worth out of this movie.
Oh yeah, special effects wise for the 2021 version, like it felt top tier. Like it felt, I thought for sure this was like $100 million budget, right? Like this,
Yeah.
these special effects blow some other superhero movies that spent like multiple hundreds of millions of dollars on special effects, and this one felt like everything, like the special effects in this movie were super tight. Like they were really good.
So Annihilation is on the bottom of the trio.
Yeah,
For sure. I would agree with that. I'd put it there.
Yeah, second on my list would be 1995's Mortal Kombat, which I put, you're probably going to disagree with me, I put it at 2 out of 5 stars.
I do disagree with you, but I think that's a fair rating.
Yeah, what's your second out of the trilogy?
Second for me would be this reboot, Mortal Kombat 2021, which obviously leaves the 1995 Mortal Kombat. And to be completely fair with you, a lot of that just might be nostalgia, right? Like I can revisit the original Mortal Kombat and be fully engaged. It's a slightly shorter movie. I just have a lot of memories surrounding it, like obviously playing the original video games, but also going to the theater to see this in 1995 and having the audience being pretty engaged at the time. I remember when Katana would show up on screen, there was a group of guys a couple rows behind us that would kind of whistle every time and just make that experience a little more engaging for the rest of the audience, I think. Like it was a tongue-in-cheek movie theater experience, but also the movie for me had a lot more personality than this one did. Like this one the original one kind of knew what it was doing, and I think with the help of Christopher Lambert playing Raiden and Shang Tsung essentially overacting and really knowing that they're in a crazy movie, playing it crazily and kind of winking at the camera, really sold it a lot more than this one, which really was a lot more serious of a film, but did not really match the energy that I got out of the first film.
Yeah, see, I don't have the nostalgia factor with the 1995 version because I didn't see it until years after the fact. Didn't really have any kind of attachment to it. I didn't see it in theaters, so it wasn't really ingrained in my brain to that extent. But like the new one, I would rank at, currently debating whether I'm gonna rank it at 2.5 or 3 stars out of 5. I just remember coming away from this one, the new one, I was just like, so many times I just had a smile on my face with the action scenes, with the over-the-top violence where the movie really came into its own. It felt like, despite all the drama going on, not despite the dramatic stuff, because like I liked when they were putting in the background of the character. These characters to me in the new one felt a little bit more fleshed out. The acting felt a little bit better than the original. The fight scenes were better than the original. The special effects, I'm taking into account the differences in the time and technology,
sure,
obviously. I just like the special effects in this one better too. Overall, I walked away from the new one with a smile on my face. It was just a super fun, enjoyable ride. It was a ride. It wasn't changing my life. It didn't teach me something about the human spirit or about, how to be a better person. It was just a fun couple hours of people, punching and kicking each other and eviscerating each other. And I enjoyed the new one a lot more than I thought I was going to.
That's pretty fair. Did you give your star rating for Mortal Kombat 2021?
Yeah, I think I would have to put it at 3 right now.
3 stars? I rated it 2.5. I don't think we're that far apart on it. For comparison, I would probably put the original 95 Mortal Kombat at 3 or 3.5, knowing full well that's kind of boosted by that nostalgia factor. And to be completely frank with you, that soundtrack in 95 Mortal Kombat still kicks a ton of butt. It is so much fun. And the music in this new one, I'm sure it's fine. I don't remember it, but I'm not going to be getting the CD of this new movie and listening to it for the next 15 years.
Well, I think in the original they actually used like the score from the game, right?
They might have.
Isn't that the theme? That's the theme from the game, and you're right. It's super memorable, and I think they just hinted at it in the score for this new movie. And you're absolutely right. I think the music is not super memorable in the new one, and I really wish they would have used that in listening in watching the 1995 version. I wish they would have used that theme more prominently.
Yeah, like they do not mess around with that theme in the original one. The movie.
Oh, no.
Even before like the New Line logo appears on screen, you hear them yell Mortal Kombat. And then the music just starts kicking as the logo of the dragon rotates around, flames shooting up everywhere. And you're like, I'm in it for this movie. But I'm talking about like the EDM soundtrack that they used. A lot of the songs, which probably dates the film a little bit. I don't know. And that's probably why I listen to that and I'm instantly transported to driving around in my car, putting on some of this music, installing some new speakers in my home stereo. I'll put on the Mortal Kombat soundtrack and just really try to feel those beats, right?
Yeah, no, I don't. Like I said, I don't have that connection to the older film. But for the newer film, like I found myself kind of looking forward to the next installment to see where this is going to take us.
I'm excited for more of them, to be honest with you. Like I think the film was fine. I want to see more of this stuff, and I really do hope that they are able to produce more of them. We're in this pandemic where we can't really talk about box office in any meaningful, contextual way. The original film, on that $18 million budget, made just over $120 million, I think, at the box office.
Oh, wow.
This one, internationally, has pulled in about $60 million. So if you look at box office, it's broken even. However, this is a Warner Brothers film in 2021. It's also released on streaming and premium rental. I wanted to talk about that as well, where this is a $25 movie rental, right? And we don't know how much money this movie is actually going to make.
Yeah, I don't think that Warner Brothers and HBO Max. This is HBO Max it's on, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's a tell right there. No, yeah, I think the same thing came up because they didn't release hard numbers for Zack Snyder's Justice League either. Mm-hmm. So I think with streaming services, the numbers are not as readily available. The box office numbers are not as readily available as they were from the theaters, or they're not releasing them. I think specifically because the streaming industry is in this period of growth, and there's a lot of competition going on between these services. So I think there's a lot more reticence to share those numbers because they don't want their competitors getting wind of that. They don't want stockholders getting wind of that if it's not as good as it should be. So I think companies, streaming services, are playing their cards a lot more tightly to their chest, or a lot more close to their chest in terms of releasing box office numbers for movies released on streaming services now, right?
Yeah, it's pretty fair. So, I mean, if you know what you're getting into with this film, and I think the trailer sold it pretty fairly. I was excited for it. I wanted an action movie. I wanted to see some of the blood and gore. And that's exactly what I got. I was disappointed that it wasn't a little more deep, I guess to say, for lack of a better word right now. A lot of it is very surface level, but I am excited for more. And seeing the context of how much they got out of that budget, I'm very confident we're going to get more of these. And I think they're going to be able to stretch them out and give us some more fun action. I'm looking forward to more. I mean, if you know what you're getting into and you put your expectations at the right level, definitely recommend this film.
100%. Like I found myself in the right mindset. You have to put yourself in the right mindset. You're not getting Shakespeare with this movie. It's a fun afternoon, Friday night popcorn flick where you're just watching people punch each other in the face. Yep. It's not quite up to the caliber of, say, your Fast and Furious or your Mission Impossible. But it's fun. It's a fun ride, and it's a nice way to spend an hour and a half with your family watching people's guts be ripped out.
You're not wrong, 100% right there. Although I don't think I'd recommend it for young children at this time.
Probably not. It's way gorier than the 1995 version. 1995 version I would definitely watch with my 10-year-old son. And the new one I thought was going to be in the same vein as the 1995 version.
Yeah.
And so I was inviting him down. I was like, come watch Mortal Kombat with me. He ended up not watching it with me, but I was like, okay, thankfully, because it was a lot more violent than I was expecting, actually.
Yeah. So that's been episode 7 of the Reel Film Chronicles. That was a lot of fun to talk about Mortal Kombat. There's some interesting history there with the game series and the movies.
One last thing, Brian.
Yeah.
Finish him!
As always, we really appreciate you listening and hanging out with us. We'd appreciate hearing some of your thoughts on the Mortal Kombat series. Send us an email, reelfilmchronicles@outlook.com. Visit our website at reelfilmchronicles.com. And until next time, stay safe out there.
Flawless victory.